Welcome back, TCS viewers, to another Unsung Cameras of Yesteryear. Now I know what you're saying, we just did one of these. What gives, Chris? The Kodak NC2000 was only a couple episodes ago, but that's okay because I've got the Epson R-D1 today. I know you've been waiting for this, so I think I'm forgiven now, aren't I? The Epson R-D1 was a very interesting camera because it was the world's first digital, interchangeable, mirrorless camera. Look what it started. You know, the Leica M8 came out right after this, but this had the first Leica M-mount digital body on the market. Did it make a splash? No, and that's unfortunate because this camera is spectacular. I'm gonna play with it today. Join me. Now, as I've already mentioned, the Epson R-D1 came with a Leica M mount on the body here, but it's actually based off of a Voigtlander Bessa body made by Cosina, and for my money, still by far one of the most attractive camera systems of all time. I love the Bessa film bodies that Cosina made, and this digital body just has such a great look and feel. It's classy, it's mean, it's serious. I love the design. Now, I will also mention here we've got a strap on here, and that's because this is actually Grant Black's camera. We'd like to thank Grant for letting us borrow his Epson R-D1. You know how much I hate straps, but because it's his camera, I'm going to use this so that I don't drop it. Although I'm still going to treat it with the same disrespect and carefree attitude that I treat all cameras with. Now you have to remember, at the time that the R-D1 came out, the Leica M8 was just around the corner. This did offer a lower cost alternative, but of course we still want to use some amazing Leica M glass, get the benefit, the warmth and tonality of those lenses. So I brought a few interesting lenses with me today. I've got the Leica 50mm 1.4 spherical, fantastic lens, of course, but also keep in mind that Voigtlander themselves made some beautiful lenses. I've got the Voigtlander 28mm with me today. Just a gorgeous, bright lens. I always love the quality. You also have the Zeiss lenses as well for M-mount. A lot of choices here to throw on your R-D1. Well, TCS TV viewers, look what we have here. It's a puddle. And I'm going to choose not to photograph this puddle today. I know it's against my character. Instead, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the screen and the rangefinder on this. Now, first off, we do have a rotating screen. You might think, well, that would be nice if I want to do a low-angle shot, but this is a CCD 2004 technology. We do not have live view here. You can rotate it and flip it out so that it's protected, and then you actually get this little calculator to figure out your frame lines, because of course this is an APS-C sensor. There's a 1.5 times crop factor, and of course back in 2004 that was pretty new to people. They had a lot of trouble getting used to that. Now you've got the viewfinder, and of course this is a classic split prism rangefinder. This is what you're going to use for all of your shooting, and that's great. I mean, that's the whole point of using a rangefinder. It's that purest aesthetic, the experience of doing it the classical way. Now in this rangefinder, if I had to have any complaints about the R-D1, it would be that the base length is not very long. You can see that there. So accuracy for the rangefinder is not exceptional. If you're using really wide aperture f1 lenses or f1.2, 1.4, you might have a hard time getting that depth of field to hit right where you want it to, but you know, that's where the Leicas do have an advantage. Overall though, for frame lines, you got a pretty handy selector here. It's not automatic, but you've got 50, 28, and 35. Now you guys have to remember, there is that conversion factor. The 28mm is our widest setting here. That's actually equivalent to about a 42. You don't have any wide angle viewfinder frame lines in this camera, so keep that in mind. That's why I've brought something extra with me today. Overall though, really simple to use, really nice, works well. Okay, so what do we do on an R-D1 if we don't have these wide angle frame lines? Well, it's very straightforward. We simply spend $8,000 Canadian, we get ourselves a 16-18-21 Tri-Elmar, beautiful lens, and we get ourselves a matching universal viewfinder. Now keep in mind, this is a full frame lens. 16 would be a 16mm ultra wide on a Leica M9, for example, but on the R-D1 with the crop factor, I'm gonna put my viewfinder to 24mm, even though I'm at 16, to account for that crop factor. I'm gonna raise my ISO a little bit, crank down the aperture. Let's go do some hyperfocal from the hip. All right, guys, I want to talk to you about by far my favorite feature on the R-D1, and that is the classic thumb winder. I have been saying for years that they should put this onto a modern digital camera, and nobody listens to me. I love this thing. Now, first off, it has a lot of benefits. It does save battery life because this quick stroke is recocking the shutter, but it's also just so nostalgic. You take a picture and you just wind it, and there's just something that feels right about that, and it feels appropriate. We've been doing it for so long. I love it. I want to see this on new cameras as well. It fits the vintage aesthetic of the camera. It gives me a place just to support the camera's weight with my thumb. There you go. I can just walk around with $3,000 glass dangling precariously, but it's great. It's balanced, it feels classic, and it brings me home. And as you guys can see today, we are shooting under some pretty brutal light, and that does, of course, convey some challenges that we don't normally experience anymore with modern digital cameras. First off, this is a classic center-weighted averaging metering system, so it can be fooled in a lot of situations. Your metering is to be unpredictable. To its credit, with the audio exposure here, we do have a great dial that very quickly lets us adjust exposure compensation, but you're back to using it on a regular basis. Keep in mind as well that this classic CCD dynamic range is not anywhere close to what we have today. So in a day like today, I've got to be very critical about checking my exposures, getting the right setups, and watching my metering system. Also keep in mind that on lenses like we have today with f2 and 1.4 apertures, it's very easy to overexpose your shot when you only have a maximum 0.002 of a second shutter speed. So it's nice. It's really going back to shooting a classic camera, but it does take a bit of practice if you haven't done it in a while. All right, guys, so I want to talk about the shutter here on the Epson R-D1, but I should go back to the film days, just mention that when Voigtlander and the Leica M film bodies were out, the common comparison between the two is that the Leicas had quieter shutters. They had that sideways traversing rubberized cloth shutter, and it was very quiet, very discreet, great for street shooting. And the Cosinas, the Voigtlanders, they always criticized for having a classic SLR shutter, multi-blade, but loud. It made a big ka-chunk, and it moved the camera quite a bit. Now, on the Epson R-D1, listen to this. Hang on, you gotta wind these things. I keep doing that. Here we go. You still get the metallic sound, but it's not too bad. And what I really like about it is maybe because of the heavier weight of the R-D1, there's almost no shake. The other thing I'm gonna say too is that the shutter fires with like a hair trigger. It almost surprises you when it takes the picture, and that does give you really good stability. So even at slow shutter speeds, this camera is fantastic. Now, by far one of the most charming aspects of the Epson R-D1 is its control interface and handling. Very simple, very straightforward. Now, of course, you've got classic inputs. On M glass, you're always gonna have the aperture right there on the lens. And for the shutter control, it's just a nice, simple click-stop dial, big enough that I can use my front finger or grab it, as a classic adjustment here. Now, here we've got a quick selector switch to go from white balance or our quality settings. Basically, I hold it and turn the dial up here on the left, and it'll change my white balance. Push it up and turn the dial, it'll change between RAW and JPEG controls. Exposure lock right there in the back, and a very simplistic menu interface. The only issues that I have with it are issues that would be on any 2004 camera. It's a little bit slow to turn on and off. It takes a while before you can view your photo pushing on the screen here because the card has to render those files through, and otherwise deleting and going through the menus is a fairly simple affair. Overall, they've made a very tactile control interface that still works in a very simple way. Honestly, modern manufacturers could learn heaps from this camera. Now, I don't know about you, but there's just something about gauges on a camera which is just so steampunk cool and at the same time very, very functional. And for me personally, the first camera I ever saw it on was the Nikon 35 Ti. I think that was back in 1993. And that camera was just fantastic. It was like steam gauges. It looks so cool. Now, the R-D1 has its own gauge interface, and again, it works really, really well. I've got a gauge here on the left for white balance. All my white balance choices are shown right there. I've got another gauge on the right which shows if I'm in RAW or high quality JPEG or normal quality. At the bottom, we literally have a fuel gauge, which is a handy way of showing us what our remaining battery life is. And then across the whole bezel, we have another gauge, like a second hand on a clock, which goes around and shows us how many shots we have left on the memory card. Now, it does look very, very functional, very, very cool, but at the same time, it does also save a lot of space. I love it, and I think Samsung borrowed it on one of their more modern digital cameras. Overall, it's charming, it's fun, and it does work. Now, when it comes to image quality, ignorantly, I figured it would be fairly poor. I mean, we're talking about a camera that's 12 years old, CCD, which I haven't used in a long time. I expect it to be pretty poor. But actually, it was very, very impressive. I mean, first off, CCDs are known for having good sharp detail. And on top of that, a rangefinder design without the mirror box enhanced the sharpness even more. And we actually got great detail out of this 6 megapixel chip. Now on top of that, low light performance, I mean, here you guys can see 400 ISO, 800 ISO, and then we go up to 1600 eventually, which is the cap for this camera. But actually the noise pattern's fairly organic, it's well controlled. I was surprised by that as well, because CCDs aren't known for having great low light performance. We could actually boost the shadows quite a bit, but dynamic range is still fairly poor. On a 2004 level camera with a CCD, dynamic range isn't great. But overall, this camera is very impressive, especially considering its age. The files are sharp, they're rich, and they're usable. The Epson R-D1 in closing was a very influential camera. Not a very good selling camera though, and it's hard to really figure out why. I mean, I was working at the store when this camera came out, and we were waiting for the new Leica. I mean, there was word that the Leica M was going to come out in a digital format, and that was very exciting. This camera came out though, and a lot of people did buy it because they wanted to get their lenses in front of a digital sensor as soon as possible. Maybe it was the fact that the name said Epson, and that didn't really resonate with anybody. Maybe they should have kept it a Voigtlander body. Maybe it was just that it was too ahead of its time, I don't know, but the Epson never really took off, and so indeed it was an unsung camera. But who would have known that this would start a change in the industry that today is now so pervasive that we all benefit from. You know, the one thing I'm going to say about the Epson R-D1 is that when everybody picks this camera up, anybody who enjoys photography gets it in their hands, the instant reaction is it's amazing, it's well designed, and it just has this je ne sais quoi that you can't quite put your finger on that's just so nice to use. It's handsome, it's comfortable, it's got a little bit of a serious edge to it, the controls are well thought out, and it's got just enough quirk and retro cool to make it fun to use. Now there are some downsides. I mean, sometimes it's hard to see your split image in the viewfinder. The rangefinder's not particularly accurate. I know the sensor's not going to blow anybody away, but this is 2004. It's actually really good compared to the cameras of that day. But the feel, the look, and the experience, most of all, are fantastic. And that's why this camera begs to be redesigned and remade for today. I mean, can you imagine a Voigtlander rangefinder that gave us a new sensor and a better viewfinder and a Voigtlander name, not the Epson Seiko name? I mean, the fact is we've got Leicas, and yes, I mean, Leicas do good image quality, they've got nice lenses, but they're grossly overpriced, and there's something missing in the design aesthetic since they became digital. They just don't have that classy experience that they used to, and we need to have some other competition in that market. And even more so, why can't we bring back these classic features like the thumb winder, the fun of it, in something like a Nikon FE or FM? I know I'm a broken record, but I really want to see that. Can you imagine having a great full-frame sensor in a Nikon FE body, you're firing your thumb winder to take your shots, and you've got that beautiful glass on there, the classic Nikkor stuff? That would be an amazing experience, and that's what I'm really talking about. We've got to get past technology and get back to making photography about the experience of shooting. That's why we spend $15,000 to outfit ourselves with Leica. It's not because they take great photos, it's because we get to use that different experience when we're shooting, and that's what we want to get back on more cameras today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell us your comments, let us know what you think about the Epson R-D1. Tweet us, Instagram us, follow us, talk to us, and subscribe to our channel. We want to keep building it, and we thank you guys every day for helping us to do that. As usual, we're going to see you soon. Until then. Lens cap off.
Wait a minute, what's going on? Thank you.